It's KUTX 98.9, and you probably recognize that last tune as Grazing in the Grass from Hugh Masekela, who happens to be from South Africa. And we're live in Studio 1A this afternoon with another South African. We're so pleased to have Johnny Clegg and members of his band, some formerly with Savuka, which you've just told me is no longer in existence. Well, welcome, Johnny. It's really a pleasure. All the way from South Africa.
Yeah. We're doing a 40-show tour of the States in 67 days. So we're kind of rushing through. And it's really great to be able to come here and meet your audience.
Yeah. It's a long tour.
Yeah, it's a long tour. Yeah. It's the biggest tour I've ever done.
Really? And when was the last time you were here in the States?
2012.
Well, I mean, I mentioned to you earlier, and a colleague walked in too and said, yeah, I saw Johnny back at Club Foot back in the early 80s.
Yeah.
So that's a show that a lot of us still remember. You're going to be at the One World Theater tonight.
That's right.
And you want to take a moment and introduce the members of your group?
Yeah, sure. On bass guitar is Trevor Dongini. He's a new addition to the band. And then Mandisa Langa, was a founding performer in the Savuka project, and I've been with her for 26 years. And then on my right here is our musical director, who is the guitarist from Savuka. So we've been together for 22 years.
So Johnny
Clegg. That's Andy Innes.
Okay. Johnny Clegg, you were born in England, and your mom is from what was then Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe.
Correct.
And you traveled around a lot. Your stepfather was a journalist. So how did you become interested in the music of South Africa?
Well, I grew up with a huge collection of Kwela music, which my stepfather had. I mean, we had a lot of all the and then the sax jive records. So it was always a background music. My mother was a jazz singer as well. She was a cabaret singer. So between a crime reporter and a jazz singer, it was a very interesting upbringing. He took me into the townships when I was 9 years old. So I knew there was another world out there at a very young age. I was learning classical Spanish guitar, and I really liked Irish and Celtic folk music as a youngster. And when I was 15, I bumped into a Zulu street guitarist, and the thing that really got me was that the guitar had been reconfigured and changed, basically Africanized. And the tuning was different, and the way of playing it was different. And in some styles, they changed the strings around and tuned them differently. So it was with very gay abandon. They took this European instrument and turned it into something that they could make their music on. And I thought that was so cool. It was so rebellious against, So I asked him to teach me. And then later on, I learned the concertina, which is it's an older instrument amongst the traditional Zulu. Dating back to the late 1800s, like 1896 is the first photograph we have of tribal Zulu playing a Western instrument like this. This also was taken and reconfigured. You buy it brand new, then you have to take it to a migrant labor hostel, and somebody there will take it apart in front of you and change all the buttons around so you can play Zulu music. So we've selected two songs really giving a little bit of an idea of the kind of mix that we do. I'm a crossover musician. I like creating conversations between different musical genres and see how they can match and meet. And so I like these original Zulu street musicians. I take music, and with gay abandon, I mix the different forms that I come up with if I like them. The concertina is also a favorite instrument for the cyclical walking music that you play, because this is a very physical instrument. If you can hear this, it's got bellows, and the Zulu, the Christians didn't like these kinds of instruments, so they used to call it Izimbambwe's Gasatan, which means Satan's ribcage. So the guitar, as well as the concertina, and many other aspects of Western culture were incorporated into this kind of crossover mixture, which became a kind of a third way between tribal and modern urban. And they were basically, this group of migrant workers were responsible for creating new dances, new ways of wearing clothes, new fashions. And they were called the Amatata, which means a person with no fixed cultural address. And the typical image of a Tata is a guy who wears a three-piece suit and car tire sandals. And he's basically saying, you know, I live in two worlds, and I'm happy in both of them. So that's where I get my inspiration from. It's from that idea that worlds in collision can actually not collide, but have a conversation. And so the music kind of comes out of that.
Would you like to play a tune for us?
Yeah, this is a song called Tough Enough. It's based on a concertina riff, like a walking riff. There's a little introduction, which is kind of obligatory in the style, so here we go.
Lumhlaba unzima, lumhlaba, lumhlaba unzima, lumhlaba,
Picture end of a cycle. Yes, fire from heaven. Oh, tide plan closing down. No more news at 11. Somewhere last of a species dies. Somewhere a child is born. When I hold you, I tremble inside. Can we ride out the storm? Are you tough enough? Can you take a pain? Are you tough enough? Walking in burning rain. Are you tough enough? Can you take the weight? Are you tough enough? Baby, just say. Into the heart of the human dream, into a strange new world. Remember me under the tree of man, where I first heard your word. Gonna make it through, I can feel it. Gonna make it through, I can feel it. Gonna make it through, I can feel it. Gonna make it through, I can feel it.
lumhlaba unzima, lumhlaba, lumhlaba unzima, lumhlaba,
What we need is a miracle. What we need is some time. What we need is an angel of mercy in this life. Are you tough enough? Can you take the pain? Are you tough enough? Walking in burning rain. Are you tough enough? Can you take the weight? Are you tough enough? Baby, just say. Into the heart of the human dream, into a strange new world. Remember me under the tree of man, when I first heard your words. Gonna make it through, I can feel it. 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 Can you feel it? Tell me, can you feel it? Can you feel it? Oh, can you feel it?
We're live in Studio 1A this afternoon with Johnny Clegg and his band. That was a tune called Tough Enough. So, Johnny, when you started playing and put, say, Jaluka together back in, I guess, the late 1970s, it was still during the era of apartheid, of course.
Yeah.
And you had the band was integrated. and that became in and of itself controversial.
Yeah.
Was the music you were playing politically motivated, or was it just the fact that you existed kind of a political statement at the time?
Yeah, the second. The fact that we existed broke all the cultural segregation laws, the Group Areas Act, the Separate Amenities Act, because essentially for apartheid to work, they had to calibrate it all the way down to the geographical separation. So schools, cultural amenities, areas where you lived were designated as racial zones. So there were 4 races, and so you had a black, a white, colored, and Indian township or areas in any town or areas where they had their own facilities, and no race group could go and perform or go there unless it was for economic activity. But to do any cultural activity or anything like that, you had to get a permit from a magistrate. You had to apply 3 months in advance and then wait until you were cleared by the security police to make sure you were not a communist or an agitator or going there to plant crazy ideas into the mind of the people. So you could never operate professionally like that, because a promoter would come to you and say, I want to put on a gig next week, and you'd say fine. So there was no time to do that. So we did a lot of hit and run shows. When Juluka was really up and running, we had about 20 or 30% of our shows closed by the police when they found out we were performing. We started to perform in the rural townships a lot. We did all of the because it was much easier. There wasn't enough, I suppose, police or people to actually monitor what was going on. So all your big city centers were closely monitored. So we did a lot of sort of traveling in those days. We had songs which had political content, but what we were trying to do as Juluka was just to say, we can mix languages in one song. We can mix melodies from our different traditions in one song. We can mix rhythm in one song, and it's fun. It's really enjoyable. That was our statement in the context of separation. We wrote songs which related to history. Juluka looked internally into South Africa. It looked into the South African experience and drew out subject matter from that and developed a way to talk about it. And we were very unique in that way, because not only did we talk about it, but we actually danced it on stage. We brought traditional tribal dances. We dressed up weirdly. I saw a great T-shirt in the hotel. Keep Austin weird. When people saw Juluka for the first time, the visual impact of it was, these guys are weird. We had cow tails on our arms. I remember we came to play in New York, and one of the guys says, why are you wearing a blonde wig on your arm? I said, no, it's a Zulu tradition. You wear cow tails. Warriors wear the cow tails. What we were doing was trying to make a visual statement to say we're integrating everything we can. It was just like being weird, you know. So that was the first band. The second band, Savuka, was launched basically during the state of emergency in 1986. So it was a much more political band. Mm-hmm. We were addressing real problems that we were seeing on a daily basis.
So when you were getting international acclaim and touring internationally, you came to Austin in the early 80s at the club, at Clubfoot. Did the government at all recognize that you were kind of cultural ambassadors at all? Or
not really. We occupied a space that they couldn't nail. The apartheid, there were always, one of the funny things about the struggle against apartheid was that there was quite a strong independence of the judiciary. They wanted, the owners of apartheid wanted the world to see that it was fair. So they had to allow the judicial process to actually follow its course. And the idea of natural justice was a very important part of human rights lawyering in South Africa at the time. My cousin was a very prominent human rights lawyer at the time, and he speaks about the fact that the Delmas 5, a very famous trial, which took nearly like a year and a half to complete. These guys were put on for treason, and they actually used the notion of natural justice to put their case. and they won the case. So there were a lot of victories within the apartheid judicial system. It's just that you had to work much harder and appeal to that kind of section of the independent judiciary. But there were also hanging judges. There were apartheid judges. There were, it was one of those kind of situations. So apartheid was a structure that one had to navigate through. I was very street smart. I was a kid when I got arrested for the first time when I was 15, and I started to understand how to get through the fences that were put up. And I also knew that they had to go to sleep and eat and do their stuff wherever, and so we used those gaps. There were gaps that we used. When we traveled overseas, we spoke about South Africa. We talked about the fact that it's so much harder to operate in our own country than operating overseas, and there was we didn't have as much political attention on us as Savuka had. I remember having my tires slashed at shows and getting death threats on the phone, and I did a show in Cape Town once, and I caricatured a security policeman. I got his voice and I got the whole story right, and it was hysterical. And we got a phone call in my hotel from a woman who was married to a member of parliament and said, you know what, you better stop that because these guys are really upset with you. So, it was all that kind of stuff going on. I think, and anybody who was, doing stuff like that would have that kind of repercussion. So, we had songs banned, we had shows closed, it was all the regular stuff. But that was the world that we knew. So we knew how to deal with it. You become tough, you become particularly awake, you're conscious of what you're doing, how to get it around, work. And we're also, apartheid legislation was mainly about public venues. So we found private venues. We played in schools, we played in church halls, we played in your lounge. We played in university halls, which were owned by the university property. So we found those kinds of loopholes, and they existed. So there was a certain amount of space that you could move through.
Johnny Clegg is our guest. He's here with his band, all the way from South Africa. They're going to be at the One World Theater tonight. Can we have you do another tune?
Yeah, sure.
Strange behavior. Every man has to be his own savior. I know I can make it on my own if I try. I'm searching for a great heart to stand me by underneath this African sky. A great heart to stand me by. I'm searching for the spirit of a great heart to hold and keep me by. I'm searching for the spirit of a great heart under African sky. Sometimes I feel that you really know me. Sometimes there's so much you can show me. There's a highway of stars across the heaven, whispering the song of the wind in the grass. There's a rolling thunder across the savannah, a hope and a dream at the edge of that sky. And your life is a story like the wind. Life is a story like the wind. And I'm searching for the spirit of a great heart ayakhala ayamemeza ayakhala yeah. I'm searching for the spirit of the great heart. I'm searching for the spirit of the great heart. I'm searching for the spirit of the great heart. I'm searching for the spirit of the great heart.
Johnny Clegg live in Studio 1A, a tune called Great Heart. He's playing at the One World Theater tonight. So I have to ask you, we're a few months past the passing of Nelson Mandela. He joined you on stage after he was released. What has his legacy done for the country and, say, music as it comes through you as an ambassador from South Africa?
He was a key, I think, to unlocking the political psyche of the country at the time. He was the right guy at the right moment. He was very, very finely attuned to the problem of nation building. He decided, he took a choice, which he has been criticized for by young firebrands today. But he took a choice of saying, I'm not going to address apartheid per se in my first 5 years. I want to find a way to create a sense that everybody has a place in this society, in the new South Africa. Everybody can occupy space and move away from the idea that political power is accessed through membership of a race, a tribe, a group, or a language, which is what we had been going through since 1948. Mm-hmm. We stand in a one-to-one relationship with our constitution as individuals. I have rights as an individual. That was a very radical and revolutionary moment for South Africa in 1990. So he led a team of people in a negotiation strategy that shifted ideologically people away from the idea that membership of a group is paramount to protect yourself. Got that enshrined into a very, very modern and very, very new kind of constitutional framework. And then as he took power, he made huge attempts to incorporate people who were, in fact, even for me it doesn't resonate, but part of his security detail were people who were involved with the security police in the old order. So he lived with these people in his office. He was incarcerated for 27 years. So I think his legacy, the greatest part of his legacy, is that he saw beyond his own suffering. He saw beyond the personal issues that he had experienced to a much greater idea of a collective opportunity of hope for everybody. Famously, the rugby, the World Cup rugby, mm-hmm. but many other initiatives that he worked on.
So has it largely worked? I mean,
yes, we look at that as the golden years now. What he did not address, which he couldn't, because he had chosen to go down this avenue, was the economic liberation of South Africa, and that is our big problem at the moment, which is to find a way to transfer economic power to the majority of South Africans. It's still largely in the hands of global companies and white capitalists who built up these businesses over 40 years or whatever it is, and they're very strong in the marketplace. So they're chipping away at that. He also had to deal with tremendous conflict within the ANC because you had a trade union movement, a labor movement, a communist party, which still calls itself the South African Communist Party, and a nationalist component, which was the ANC itself. And so these three groups now have kind of, the Labour Party has split. There's, it's a whole new sort of political landscape has developed. But he tried to keep that together, and basically find a space for everybody. And I think that his legacy is that whatever happens afterwards, we had that 10 years of comfort that people kind of. I remember, hearing. It was just a very amazing time because, there was a sense of forgiveness in the air. There was a sense of, if you didn't pay your rent on time, the land was okay, give it. Everybody felt that. It was that kind of an atmosphere. There were a lot of problems. There were a lot of handing over power from the civil service into the hands of untrained black civilians who then had to be trained up to do the job. So there was a drop in efficiency, a drop in delivery. And delivery is still a real problem in our country, social services and other delivery. So these are all problems of our transition, of trying to address the legacy of apartheid, but also to find a way to build the country into a new direction. And I think that he laid key, very key groundwork. One of the main things, there was a massive apartheid debt. The Swiss banks had bankrolled the last 10 years of apartheid against the cultural boycott. We know here in America we had massive divestment from university campuses, and from other companies, but the Swiss banks basically lent the money, and then afterwards he had to accept that debt. I mean, the great irony is that the new government had to pay the debt that the apartheid government had incurred over 10 years. And when they went to the World Bank and to other international institutions, they said it's very important that you are seen to meet your debt, because we won't lend you money to develop your new country unless you pay your debts. And he had to convince some very radical components inside his own movement that they should do that, and they did. So those kinds of moments were pivotal. It was the first blush of our freedom, and for all warts and all, there were other issues which you could look at, but in the main, I think he did a great job.
Johnny Clegg, thank you for not only sharing your music but educating us in kind of the politics and that surrounded the music that you made.
Thank you so much.
It's important.
Thank you.
Johnny Clegg and his band will be at the One World Theater tonight. Thanks to Casey Cheek, who's been our engineer this afternoon. I'm Jay Trachtenberg. I'll be around till 3 o'clock when Matt Riley rolls on in. It's KUTX 98.9, bringing you the Austin Music Experience.